Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight, even in this somewhat, shall we say, dreary weather, for really excellent conversation. My name is Amy Gilman, and I am the director here at the Chazen Museum of Art. And I have met many of you, but for those of you I have not met in my now 7 whirlwind weeks of being the director here, I hope that you will feel free to reach out to me, introduce yourself to me after the talk tonight. Let me know what you're interested in, what concerns you have, questions you have, etc. You can always reach me in my office just across the way over here, but also I am accessible on the web. My email address and phone number are on the museum's website. So thank you all for coming this evening for what I anticipate to be a sort of wonderful and enlightening conversation between our 2 distinguished speakers. And this is part of a group of programs that are designed to illuminate, if you will, different aspects, I think, of Dan's work and of the exhibition. And if you have not had a chance yet to go through the exhibition, I hope that you will take the time to do so after our program here ends tonight. So in order to introduce our speakers, it is my privilege to introduce Ann Sinfield, who is the curator of the exhibition, of Dan Ramirez's exhibition here, and also oversees temporary exhibitions here at the Chazen. This exhibition has been a real labor of love for her because she really deeply engaged with the work, and I think that has resulted in a really spectacular exhibition that really highlights the work in its best possible way, but also produced a really stunning catalog. So please welcome Ann Sinfield.
Thank you, Amy. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters tonight. I'm going to start with Dan. Dan Ramirez and I have a couple of things in common. We're both half Mexican-American. We both love jazz music, and we both left our PhD programs in the first year. Unlike me, Dan was born in Chicago. He received his BA from the University of Illinois at Chicago and his MFA from the University of Chicago. He taught at Columbia College, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and for 12 years here at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. His work has been exhibited around the U.S. and internationally, and luckily for us here in Madison now. If you're interested in more information about his background, I highly recommend this really thorough interview done by Julie Karabenik in 2014. It's available online on the geoform.net website. It's very thorough and just really great. Dr. Richard Shiff is here tonight from the University of Texas at Austin, where he is the Effie Marie Kane Regents Chair in Art, and where he directs the Center for the Study of Modernism. His scholarly work is focused on modern and contemporary art, and he's written about a variety of artists, including Bridget Riley, Richard Serra, Donald Judd, Cy Twombly, Julie Meritou, Barnett Newman, and now for our exhibition catalog, Dan Ramirez. The exhibition catalog available in the shop. His publications are also, as you know, very widely covered. From 1984 to the present, he's published titles such as Cezanne and the End of Impressionism, Critical Terms for Art History, Barnett Newman, A Catalogue Raisonné, and Between Sense and de Kooning. Recently, Dr. Shiff has taken on a brand new role, that of curator, for an exhibition of the work of American abstractionist Jack Whitten. He's in a unique position with this project. Dr. Shiff has served as the MFA advisor for both Dan Ramirez and our speaker next week, Buzz Spector. So please join me in welcoming Dan Ramirez and Dr. Richard Shiff.
Okay,
Be my guest, Richard.
Dan, I'll start off because I'm new here. You saw the exhibition before. I saw it yesterday for the first time, and I was really impressed by the installation, Anne, which I think makes everything look terrific. I like the architecture. It's a beautiful space to work with. I also found it interesting how the different feel of the large room and the smaller room, because the smaller room has some sizable works in it, but a lot of smaller works as well. And you get, between the two rooms, I think you get a very good feel for the, what I might call the phenomenological range of Dan Ramirez's work. There's always, whether it's small or large, there's always a terrific sense of human scale that's applied to the format itself, the whole shape of the thing, and to all of the marks that are within it. Maybe you feel that especially with graphite marks that are being pulled across in some of the works, or the fading of the thin sheets of acrylic that you see in other works, and or sometimes you see both of those effects in a single work. You also see a lot of reflectivity, or the play of reflective and matte surfaces in these works. All of these features that are inherent to the medium of painting, because they're just there to be used, they're being used very, very effectively in these works. And one thing that I thought of, Dan, I know I mentioned this to you just a couple of hours ago, was that I felt that you were so involved with the essence of painting in many of these works that you were dealing with that before you ever got to the stage of making what people would think of as a picture. And so these are works that require of the viewer to see, strangely, in both an analytical way. I should put one on the screen. Let's see if I can. Where's my cursor?
There we go. Yeah, we got it.
All right, so that's an early one, and it's in the first gallery, the big room.
Yeah, that's an early painting, and it's kind of I guess it's representative of a movement in art, so to speak, which refers back to the 1960s in the minimalist tradition, which was kind of a tradition that grew out of a sense of examining space, examining what a painting is not, and so forth. A movement that eventually became more prominent as a role in sculpture as opposed to painting. But the thought of the essence of painting, I think, is really important, because when I first began to approach wanting to be an artist, I wanted to be a cartoonist before I wanted to be anything else. And I went to a school that I thought I might start to learn something like that. It was a Bauhaus-oriented school, which has a lot of different ranges, the last of which would have been cartooning or commercial art, which I was really interested in. So I did learn a lot about lines and spaces and colors. But I came there with a real sense of wanting to somehow acquaint myself with number one, being educated. I thought I needed to be educated. I was coming out of a background where I came to school very late. I was, I think, 29 or 30 years old when I started school. I came out of a background of steel hauler, driving a truck for about 17 years and doing that kind of thing instead. So for me to come to a situation where I'm being asked to, because I took courses in visual arts, to make paintings or to make images, I didn't know where to begin. What's the essence of a painting? And that's a question to this day I still don't know. I find myself moving in and out of a lot of different ranges, Richard, where, we talked a little earlier today about a painting we were looking at, and I said, did I make a piece of sculpture or did I make a painting? I don't know what I made. All I really reflect on really is the fact that I had an interest in some questions that came up and kind of evolved into this image. And maybe you can throw it up on the screen.
Yeah, that's what
yeah, if we can get to
I
that
keep
one.
losing the cursor here, but it's right here.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, where we're talking about this one.
Yeah, we were talking about this one earlier, and I got to a point where I guess I was so frustrated at a certain point in my life about, should it be paint, should it be shaped, should it be this, should it be that, should I add this? And I've got aluminum on there, I have nuts and bolts on there. It's really, for me, it was a kind of a search about what it means to make this thing that somehow reflected what I was feeling, what I was thinking about. kind of helping along with that were a lot of things I was reading at the time and whatever. But the idea of dealing with the essence of something is really, I think it's really kind of beyond my ability or capability to really, what is the essence of something? I don't know what the essence of something is. I do know what I touch. I do know what I can hold in my hand. I do know what I can feel. And it's kind of the way I work. So I guess if there's an essence involved, it kind of relates back to my old truck driving days when I could feel the steering wheel. I could pull the binder down and hold that big roll of steel on there and
Feel the road while you were
I can feel the road
driving.
while I'm working and things like that. And that's really the kind of it's what I bring to the studio. That's who I am. That's what I bring to the studio when I work. I can't help remembering, Richard, when we were when I was in grad school and you were there back in 1970, it's okay, the date's okay? Yeah, 76, all right? All right.
I thought it was the 90s.
Yeah, it was the 90s, sure it was the 90s. Yeah, I wish it was the 90s myself. I'm older than you, don't forget that. No,
That's true.
But I remember coming out of undergrad school, I was already moving along a little bit with working with lines like this and different variations on some things that interested me, visual things that interested me. And I would build stories and things of that nature, and I'm interested in things. And I remember when I finally got to U of C and started the grad program, and I took a course with you, and it was contemporary art history course. And we were given a test, and it was a series of essays we had to write. And you gave me Tony Smith. Was it Tony Smith? No. The die?
Yeah, it was Tony Smith.
Smith.
Yeah.
For those of you not familiar with Tony Smith, as a sculptor, and so the image that I was given to work with was this big cube of Corten steel. Now, I know steel. I hauled it for a long time. I know what it weighs, I know what it feels like. And for me to see that for the first time, in relationship to already spending a couple of years back in undergrad school trying to work out some problems for myself, although I was prompted at times to dig deeper into what art may or may not be about, it was hard for me to come to terms with getting back to the idea of the essence of a painting, the essence of what is art, period. And that just didn't fly with me, this cube. I just didn't see it as a work of art. But I had to pass this course, so I had to find a way to feel it as a work of art. And so,
Or not.
but
We accepted
you
a
did,
broad
yeah,
range of
you did.
responses.
That's true. But typical of the way I work, I make up stories. I like to tell stories to myself, and I start to embellish some of those stories with a certain kind of ambiance about my own life, like we all do when we talk to ourselves. And so, that kind of production, that kind of move through the work is really, I think, when you talk about the essence, for me, that's probably the essence of, I won't say painting yet, because I'm really not sure what a painting is. That's one of the things I strive for all the time and explore quite a bit with my work. But if there's an essence of anything, it's, I think, the spirit any individual brings to whatever they do. I don't care if it's driving a truck. I don't care if it's making a painting. I don't care if it's working in your office. I don't care what it is. What you bring there that day is going to be the thing that's going to prompt what the production of that day is, how you feel about when you went home. And if there's an essence about it, that's probably it for me. Now, I hope that doesn't sound too philosophical, because I wouldn't want to try and get into the essence of the philosophy of essence. But that's kind of like getting back to the question you prompted.
Yeah, it's about. I mean, it's. I think you used the term explore. It's an exploration. It's like finding something out, and you're very often dealing with the matter at hand. You get curious about a material, curious about a shape, what can be done. I mean, recently you've been very curious about aluminum and its reflectivity and the way it can interact with paint. But before we leave this, I want to say what's on the screen right now, and I can shift to a couple of other things quickly. I just want to point out that in this particular case, the work on the screen, you obviously made a decision about how far it should project off the wall, because the work is an object. It therefore casts a shadow one way or another, and the light reflectivity of it, as well as the shadow, the fact that it blocks light or projects its own shape, all of that is a consideration for you.
It is. It was. It still is. And what really prompted my moving not only this particular painting, but a number of paintings that I was doing during that period of time off the wall, reverts back to and reflects back to what I mentioned earlier about minimalism. One of minimalism's projects, so to speak, was the relationship of removing the illusion of three-dimensional space on a picture plane, on a piece of canvas, let's say on a painting, and creating only the object, making just the object itself. You've probably heard of it, the red square, this thing in and of itself. It's this object that you have. That always drove me nuts, just totally drove me nuts. I said, painting's got to be about more than that. It just has to. I don't know what it has to be more about, but it's got to be more for me about that. Although I found it really an interesting idea. And I also thought at times some of those projects that came out of that particular idea of minimalism in painting were quite beautiful. The aesthetics were quite beautiful. But it prompted me to start putting paintings on a wall that would project from the wall so they'd look like objects. That seemed like the obvious thing to do to me. Just let them float in the wall. And then all of a sudden there's shadows, and there's this, and there's that, and all of a sudden you've got something else that I'm working with. And that's, again, that's part of the exploration when the question comes into your mind, at least into my mind, about what is a painting, if I'm asking that kind of question of myself, or how does this particular color work right here? How does this particular angle fly on the wall, or whatever the case may be? And those issues come up. And so, yeah, that's why it was off the wall. I'm still fighting with the idea of the object, the thing that I'm working on, and what I put on the object, or what I attach to the object. How do those things correlate? What do they mean to me? What are they about? Ultimately, I've come to find out as the years progress, they're about it. They're about this thing. They're about, I mean, I could have all these wonderful little things I tell myself and kind of narrate to myself about what I'm seeking. The line might symbolize something for myself. The shape might symbolize something for myself. Bottom line is, when I leave that piece, as I think many of us have probably experienced, and the artist isn't there, you've got just that to deal with. The artist isn't there anymore. Well, I've come, as time has progressed, to recognize I'm not there sometimes either. And so it's going to be gone. And so it's not mine anymore, so to speak. And we kind of experience that thing in the way it sits.
I mean, here's an example on the screen, so you can see what we're, and I mean, this particular work is not in the show, but because the photography gets it from the side view, it's a useful example, and it's the case you do this quite often, which is to activate the sides of the object,
Right.
so they're painted, and maybe you can explain what's going on there with that black line.
The black line? Well, the black line in this particular instance, it has a function. It has a function because I used it for so many years that it kind of had a different function as it moved along. And I want to go back there in a second, but in this particular case, its main function is to simply let you know, the viewer, if there is a corner there, it's on this object. As it comes down the side, it begins to do something to the edge of the picture plane itself, the object itself, and the front of the picture plane itself. And sometimes I don't know what it's going to do, but I put it on there because I like to paint this line, because it always surprises me somehow. So I put it in there, and I let the context of this painting start to unfold by itself, so to speak. And if you'll notice, there's a long black to white kind of gradated. What I saw, or when I first put that on there, my idea was I'm going to paint this volume. So I made this kind of volumetric form with the gradations of light to dark. And if you look at the top, you can, or let's look at the middle. You can see a little bit of a roundness. If you move to the bottom, it gets a little flatter. But if you move to the top and you recognize that at the edge, it's a sheet. So it can't be a tube. I like that. I didn't know I was doing that, but that started to bring some questions or bring some results to me that said, this is what painting's about. These little experiences that you find, what do they mean? Well, they can mean a lot of things, and I have a lot of things I could tell you what I think they mean. Point is, that was an accident, so to speak, in terms of what the result was. Not in terms of how I put it on there, but what the result was. The second part that really interested me, Richard, about that particular painting was, when I looked at it, I have this title, Aletheia, about disclosure, about exposing something. I said, literally, let's expose the side of that section of the canvas by pulling and peeling that space off. And so I looked at it, and I came to realize, well, if I grab the dark edge there and I pull it back, it's too big. It don't fit. It's not a part of this painting. I like that. I like that a lot. That meant it was worth doing. It was an interesting thing for me to happen, and it began to interact with other parts of the painting, other parts that were kind of unexpected, as to where the planes might lie, where are they shifting, where are they moving. I'm asking of the viewer to eventually have a dialogue with me, not in terms of what I think the painting means, but what do you find in there that I haven't found yet, for example? Or perhaps you take a little bit of the trip with me and say, this guy, he doesn't know what he's doing. He moves over here, moves over there, or whatever the case may be. But the viewer begins to participate on the viewer's own sensibility, own sense of what it brings to the work itself. And so the kind of disclosure, I had one, the viewer has another kind of, let's call it, for lack of a better term, to bring your own momentary truth to that painting as to what it's about. And I use the word momentary very specifically because I'm one who believes that truth changes very quickly in terms of context, obviously, and it just kind of moves very quickly through the work itself. So this is a painting that kind of exemplifies my process, the way I work with the painting. I mean, I touch the canvas, I brush the canvas, I have these feelings with the canvas, the canvas moves in and out when I touch it. All of those things in one way or another begin to have some relationship to what might take place next, because I don't know what's going to take place next.
And then this would be, potentially maybe even a more complicated example of that curling away. And this is in the exhibition, and I think maybe you should say something about that bare canvas in the corner.
Well, we were talking a couple of moments ago, a little while back, about the minimalism in the object, and again, it's my response to the fact that it's got to be more than an object somehow, but I think the object is important itself. What we'll call the substrate being in this particular case canvas as opposed to aluminum or some other kind of material. And so I wanted to reveal the substrate of what this particular illusion that I was painting on the front, where it was taking place, where it's having this dance right on the surface of this raw canvas. It's all raw canvas in the lower left-hand corner, and I use a certain kind of gel medium to solidify the canvas so it won't deteriorate over time. And then the illusion begins to be painted over the top, and then I bring in this little planet, which I didn't know I was going to bring in this little planet, but when I thought of the word cosmic cathedral, well, I got to have a planet. So I put a planet in there. And I thought, Richard, in the essay that you wrote, your characterization of how that planet worked in terms of how it resulted in scale, but you could probably respond to it better than I can. But that was significant for me to have someone else see this other possibility that arose out of a painting that I had a different idea about, but there it was.
Yeah, it seems to generate an expanse of space just by being there and being painted illusionistically also, which it's not a circle, it's a sphere, and it's just floating there in what ought to be maybe read as a curled piece of paper, but it also reads as outer space. It does both. As we've been talking about a lot of analytical, what we might think of as analytical features of your work, that you think about illusion, you think about perspective, you think about perspective that doesn't work very often, like the Necker cube that you're interested in, which is a graphic form that you often see in books on perception, which looks as if it can read as if it's projecting forward or as if it's going back or going to the right or going to the left. It reads both ways at the same time, so it's a paradox. But at the same time, you're working with matter, you're working with space, you're working with light, and I know that for you, there's always also a kind of, you used the word a few minutes ago, there's a kind of spiritual dimension to these works, or which may or may not be religious. But let's say that it stands in for maybe if in our lives, in our thought, half of it is analytical and problem solving. The other half of it is maybe wondering, speculating, thinking about things that we don't control, that we can't quite represent. And a lot of your work is inspired by those issues, those questions.
They are. And referring back again to something I mentioned earlier about when I was in undergrad school and I bring stories to the work so I could start to make a painting. How do you make a painting and make a story? Well, the story that interested me most at the time was I come from a very strong background in Catholicism, Roman Catholicism from my family. And so I had to deal with some issues all my life about what all that meant. I was never what you'd call a very pious young man, and I'd go to church and take the money I was supposed to put in the box and have coffee with my friends and make sure my parents didn't know about it. Nevertheless, it was a serious issue with me. And it survived all through my young childhood and right into undergrad school, is what all that meant. Those kind of things, and they interested me. And so because of that, as I began to explore different kinds of shapes, there was a period in my work where issues like this particular trapezoid came into play. And I looked, as I read a lot of books and look at a lot of pictures and saw some cathedrals relating back to the ideas of religion and so forth, and not being this religious person that I was at the time, or am now, as a matter of fact. I saw some different structures, and I saw one that just sounded beautiful. It was a vaulting system, and it was called the Tirceran Star. Oh, how beautiful, the Tirceran Star. And I figured, gee, this would make a nice architectural component, something I could draw with and I could paint with and so forth. And I asked myself, well, what else could this thing symbolize? What else could it be? Well, Gothic cathedrals are a lot about uplifting to God and taking it up to the highest levels of transcendence, way beyond what I was really capable of I think, comprehending as something that was a part of my psyche at the time. But I thought it was still a very interesting question. I thought it was an interesting question. And I read a lot about those kinds of questions, but this particular shape was interesting because, and we've talked a little bit about this, Richard, and you mentioned it actually in the essay as well. The triangle itself has this kind of uplifting thing. And when you cut off the top, which I inadvertently did while I was doing some drawings, it seemed like a much more interesting composition when I cut off. It seemed more exciting to me when I cut off the top, although the base is much wider. And I noticed something that was really, really kind of strange, where I'm putting into this truncated triangle, if you will, this Gothic cathedral Tirceran Star vaulting, which has a symbolic resonance of its own in terms of what I mentioned a moment ago about this uplifting to this religious concept of God and the higher and the heavens and so forth, was that the truncated trapezoid pushes down. It's got a physical gravity that's getting back to, let's call it, just looking at an object. It has this pushing down like a weight. And I thought, wow, what a nice contradiction that kind of fits my style in the sense that, well, I don't really believe in this kind of like stuff up there anyway, as much as it interests me. And when I say I don't believe in it, I don't mean that disrespectfully, because I'm not sure yet I don't still believe in it, which is maybe what a lot of this exhibition's about in a lot of ways, and that's why it's titled, which your title surprised me so much. I'll never forget that, Ann, when you told me what the title would be. Then I find out you wrote a book on doubt. This is starting to really be fun. But this painting would certainly be a representation of the kind of issue like what I'm having a little fun here with, but in a more serious way. And so in a lot of ways, it had to be beautiful for me because I honor the fact that that has a relationship to the idea of God, because I think the idea of God has a lot of resonance for all of us. And so That, in combination with one other thing that we haven't talked about yet, and that is my musical background. Because the title of this piece is called Celestial City, which was another component. I mean, as I talk about the way I work on some of these things, there are a lot of reading I do, a lot of other things. I was a professional musician for a number of years, played double bass. And a particular composer, composer of religious music named Olivier Messiaen from France, who played the organ at St. Trinity in Paris, wrote these wonderful symphonies, one of which was the Celestial City. And he talks a lot about color. Messiaen he's now deceased. He's had these color, he was synesthetic, that is, he could color and sound, he had that relationship. And I thought that was pretty cool because I started to feel that with my own work, although I don't have that kind of, I don't have synesthesia at all. But the symbolic nature of what a color could mean, a blue, a celestial, or something like that. And so I found a kindredship with him. And I always felt great about this kind of kindredship. It just made me feel good in the studio. I love music, I love listening to his music, it's very abstract. But there was kind of a kindredship there that I shared with him. So I wanted to honor that. And so almost anything that I do relative to his particular music making, if you will, his religious music, I try to personify it with a lot of what I consider to be beautiful. In this case, I used a lot of aluminum kind of iridescent paint that has a nice glow and light to it. So I was building all that up. But at the same time, I'm still pushing down that truncated form of the tertiary star. But primarily, the tertiary star became a structural component, a visual structural component that I could do more drawings from and more things from. So there's a very practical side to a lot of this, as you begin to slice these things up into little pieces.
Yeah, we get, of course, a lot of variations that grow out of the form. You know, with regard to the trapezoid, of course, it shows up very early in your work, and then it shows you're still using it, and so we have the work that was made specifically for this show. And that's a trapezoid, but these, when you're in the first gallery, the big room, all of those trapezoids are approximately 8 feet high, so they're bigger than we are. They're still more or less human scale. We can relate to them. They don't feel as if they're towering over us and making us feel small, but they are big. So I think there's a I mean, you've already alluded to it, there's a beautiful contradiction in that form. It goes up and then it breaks off. It doesn't attain the movement upward that you think would belong to it, and because it breaks off, as you said, it becomes wider at the bottom than it is high. And so it's actually a squat form. It's
It
like
is,
earthbound.
Yeah, it is.
But it's also 8 feet high. So it's not exactly earthbound in relation to us.
True.
It's
Army.
in the abstract, it's earthbound. So there's a beautiful tension there between the different feelings that we may feel virtually simultaneously of something like straining to go up and at the same time being, you know, solidly there and wanting to stay there. And then, you know, I think you should talk a bit about your feelings as you made the various components of this particular work.
This painting has caused me a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. Not all last paintings you do are the most exciting paintings you do. Sometimes we think that and sometimes that. This one may be for me because of the trouble it's gotten me into. But I want to get back to that in a minute because there are a couple of issues here that I want to touch on a little bit too, and that is this idea of this peeling back on the one hand, giving in this particular object a sense of that it's a painting in some respects, but it's an object in another because it's on birchwood and it's raw birchwood. This idea of the object and the illusion of two things working simultaneously. Getting back to the Necker cube, what Richard was talking earlier about this cube that goes to the right or to the left, And when we look at the Necker cube, depending on where you put your eye, the plane is in the front, or if you switch your eye to the other side, it's over to the left. Can it be in both places at the same time? Well, I can't experience it at both places at the same time, but yet it really is. It really is in both places at the same time. It's there, but I can't experience that. I have to shift my cerebral whatever that says it's there or it's there. Now, it's one of the things that it interests me because it's how I come to these kinds of ideas about exposing canvas or dealing with an illusion on top of it. Getting two things to work simultaneously is an interesting thing to me. It's an interesting project, and I work with it. I want to talk just a little bit, if we can, Richard, about one of the Friedrich silkscreen pieces.
Okay.
I think it'll give a good example of how I kind of jump into this
Now,
idea of simultaneity.
Should it be this or the other?
First, do this one. That one will work. That one right there.
Okay.
That one right there. Yeah. This was one of those surprises again for me. And I did this piece while I was here teaching at the University of Wisconsin. I did this piece on an Amiga computer. Maybe some of you remember the old Amiga computers. Bruce, you must remember the old Amiga computers, right? So, and I was working on this piece, and as I tend to do when I'm working on computers, I'll stick one thing on there and stick another thing on there. Let's see what I got. But one of the things that prompted me to kind of move in the colors that I was here is that I'm still dealing with that idea of minimalism. The big white, if we take the image off for a second, the big white piece with the red band on the side. And it's also done in Formica, which some of the minimalists like to use when they want to make objects. They have it made by an industry. They wouldn't use their own hands. They'd have it made someplace else. And so that was kind of like the start of it, and I stuck the image on there, and then I put this little white cane. And for me, it was like this blind person, this guy looking into this nothing but really can't see, which is it's a quotation from a Friedrich painting called "Wanderer Looking into a Sea of Fog," or "Wandering Looking Out into the Sea," or whatever, out into the valley, whatever. So it's a big landscape, whatever the case may be. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it.
There it is.
Yeah, that's it right there. That's the Wanderer, and that's. Well, the woman we'll get back to in a second. I think we're doing okay here. Get back to the image we were on. This image here, I saw it always just the way I just explained it, except for about a year ago. This is one of the wonders about coming back to your work later when you're still dealing with the same kind of problems you were dealing with before, in this case, simultaneity. And I looked at it. And I looked at it, and I said, you know what? Maybe he's not holding the king. Maybe he's holding, now look at see that strip at the top? That's what the top of that piece looks like, because I had the Formica put across there too. Maybe he's just holding the thing he's printed on in his hand. And he's printed right on the other side of it on this side. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, or some of us are old enough to remember the old kitchen cleanser can, where this young lady was holding a can of kitchen cleanser with a frying pan that was sparkling, and her image was in this kitchen can. The image was another can of kitchen cleanser with herself in there again, and then ad infinitum. It just went on and on and on. And I looked at this and I said, dang, it was entitled Landscape, and I changed it to Diptych, Diptych. Because now it's really two pieces, at least, maybe more. But I really raise this only because it's the way I think. It's the kind of fun I have with these things. They're jokes in a lot of ways, but yet they're serious enough for me to keep exploring the idea of simultaneity. Can you experience something, two things at one time? And what would it mean if you could? Is there a God? Is there not a God? Yeah, and all this kind of stuff. It's really shaky, but it's fun. And it's interesting. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And if we can just shift one more before we get to that. I want to talk about the painting last because the way it's frightened to me.
Which one?
Let's go to go first to the two Friedrich paintings.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of you may be familiar with a Friedrich painting. Friedrich was a German Northern Romantic. Saying that right? German?
Yeah.
Northern Romantic, right. And this is his wife, Catherine, just looking out a window. At least I believe it's his wife, Catherine, so the books have said that I've read about it. And this kind of like tied in with this other Friedrich painting I was just talking about, with the image on the front looking out into the sea of fog. And it reminded me again about this idea of being blind, not being able to see. I toy with that a little bit, and it's my own way of kind of like poking with the minimalist a little bit about space and ideas about space. So let's bring this one up. I did a series of images. And this is the back of her head. It's the back of her head, and it's an illusion of an embossing, and it has that white cane again. So for me, it was literally basically this idea of touch and braille and feeling, but yet it's flat. It's the contradiction that it's not real at all. You can't touch it. That's the kind of questions I was raising to myself, in the hopes also that any viewer would look at it and kind of wonder itself, what is this thing about? What do all these different things mean? It's a sharing with your viewer. It's a sharing with the people that may or may not, or that may see your work. And it's a part of really what it means to be creative, hopefully, and to make art. It's to share. And so this kind of a thing was really important. And I want to step back a little bit, again, about the same image, about the same image. And I want to do a little plug. I want to do a little plug for the university here. And this is something that only came to mind recently, because you and I have discussed, Richard, about the act of seeing, the act of looking, touching, the idea of touch, the haptic relationship to what you feel when we're painting, that whole idea. And there is a man named Paul Beccarita. And Paul Beccarita, for those of you who aren't familiar with Paul Beccarita, you should be. He was a renowned researcher here at the University of Wisconsin. And he was, as I understand it, he was, I believe, nominated for the Nobel Prize a number of times. Did not get it, but he was nominated nevertheless. A real Renaissance man who invented, if you will, a number of things, dealing with the haptic thing, developing things that astronauts could use with their hands and so forth. But getting back to the idea of sight, he developed and created these glasses that you can wear with, attached to it is a controller and a little thing that looks like a lollipop that you put in your mouth, and it has digitized little things that are promoted onto the tongue. And basically what he said is, you see with your brain. And these blind people could see motion, scale. I mean, it's just amazing. But it just brought, when I was looking at these recent, so this kind of an experience is it's big. It's about a lot of things that are going out there that maybe aren't about something exactly like this. But in any case, I wanted to bring that up because...
Well, yeah, well, this connects beautifully to the Alethea Scribe's reveal. In your experience with the conflict, let's say, or the tension between how it looked and how it felt.
Let's
Yeah,
put that one
I mean,
back
it's a beautiful relationship, and which you could not have predicted because you weren't thinking of one while you were doing the other.
I wasn't. In fact, that was done, I think, in 1996. That particular image was in 96. But as the years have passed, I read quite a bit, and so I began to read about Paul, and I was reading some things about him and said, oh my goodness, this is just it's incredible. All right, yeah. As I worked on this particular, some of you may or may not have read the essay, but as I worked on this particular piece, that central panel of graphite, the other parts I knew exactly what I was going to do, and they were actually completed before I worked on the central part, which the graphite is, was on the horizontal. So I would scribe these lines, and I'd scribe and I'd scribe and I'd scribe. Now I've worked in graphite before, many years prior to making this particular piece. But as I'm scribing and I'm scribing, when you get into this kind of like this constant repetition, you kind of like, you just kind of like you're thinking and things are happening and all these things are going through my mind. And I won't say yet exactly what those things were because it was more about reflection. But I'm moving along and moving along and moving along, knowing that when I finish, I'm going to have this beautiful black graphite surface that I've always had in the past over the years, and they are just beautiful. Well, we put it vertical. And as Ann, who was with me there, can recall, I step back and say, oh my God, look at those smudge marks. Look at that mess. I mean, I was really not happy at all. But when you're exploring and you're looking for ways to move forward and to learn about what it is to be who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, what a great thing to have happened. Because what happened was this thing revealed itself in its own way because there's a pattern of wood underneath there that decided, well, this pattern of wood is going to show. Now, I should have known that, right? But I wasn't paying attention to that. That's not where my focus was at. I'm thinking about, as I'm working on this thing, it's like I can feel the pencil, I can feel and hear the scraping on the wood, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I remember when I used to play bass, you play bass, and I could feel the instrument against my chest, against my stomach. You strum an A string, especially a G string, you strum that, and you can feel the vibration, and you're moving intellectually because you know the chord, and you're feeling it, and I'm saying, wow, and so all that's going on, and I'm not paying any attention to it, and so what happens? I get this. Maybe it's like having a nice piece of jazz when you're finished. I don't know. I wouldn't correlate the two because they're two different mediums totally. But the experience was really a wonderful experience. And there were other things that came into play, or other ways I understood a certain kind of communication that was going on relative to other people I was talking to at the time and were not with me at the time that I would be reflecting on, and they knew who they are and all this kind of stuff. But the dilemma is that I'm starting a new piece like this now. Brett Stageman, who works here at the museum, built a piece for me, and I'm working on it. I've got a problem. I already know what happens now when I start doing this on the wood. Mm-hmm. Do I want to illustrate that now? Am I going to do the same thing and just illustrate? I've got to figure out a way where I learn something new and I'm stuck.
You may not be able to use that material ever again.
It's possible. I don't know. But I'm going to start it because I have confidence in that. My experience has been, start it, do it, see what happens. So that's my next project. I mean, that's what's going on. What it will reveal, I'll see when it happens.
Yeah, we'll have a different reveal. Yeah. I know that we wanted to leave 10 minutes for questions from the audience, and we're at that point now. I just want to one last thought from my perspective. I was trying to imagine how I would feel walking into the beginning of the exhibition, the big space, and seeing those 7, I guess, trapezoidal works, as well as the etchings. But those 7 large works in the space, is it 7 or even 8? I don't.
8. One's not a trapezoid.
Yes, one. That's right. That's why I'm confused. One is a rectangle. And if I had not been familiar with these works since the 1970s, some of the earliest ones I saw when they were being made, I would think this was all very, very strange. And I would have to accommodate myself to it because these works don't really look like other works. They're very much their own creatures. And that's a remarkable achievement for that. And that's true of the recent work as well, which is in different formats. Even if the format is a rectangle, which is the standard one, the way the rectangle is divided is odd, the way the edges are treated is odd, the way the surfaces are treated is a little bit odd. And all of these works draw you in, and you begin to understand. It's like learning a new language. But you do learn it. These works, I think, are very much able to teach us how to see them. We don't need to bring a set of instructions with us. So do you want to moderate the questions?
Sure, I can do that. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and then afterward, we do have opportunities for a book signing out in the lobby. So if you'd like to have Dan or Dr. Shiff sign the books, they'll be available. Does anyone have any questions? Just, yep, why don't we go right here?
Dr. Ramirez, how do you paint it? Is it on a wall, and are you on a ladder? Is it on a table? How do you do this?
That's a great question. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We talked about this with the docents a little bit.
Do you want to
You put
repeat
the,
the
put-
question?
Put the MCA painting up.
Shout it out?
Yeah, Dan, do you want to
which-
rephrase?
is
The
it
question
this
is
or
about how
which one?
Dan paints. What's the
that one.
method or what's the process of making the paintings?
Actually, I'm sorry. No, put up the one that's in the Chazen collection.
Yeah, okay. Which is this one?
Yeah,
Or-
that's it. I had the opportunity to talk with the docents before, a couple of days before the opening, and I was asked a question similar to yours. It's about process. And if you look at the left and the right side of these, there's this kind of waving going on. Now, the process simply is, I have a brush, and I'm going to stand for a second, if that's all right, okay? I have a brush, and I start at the top. I have a bucket of just pure water, and I have this color that I want to finish with at the bottom, and it's just a black, basically, just black. And so as I'm painting, I'm moving across, and I'm pouring a little bit at a time of this color into the bucket and mixing it up and painting it across as fast as I can. Now, what I'm after, of course, is a perfect, nice gradation, smooth. And I'm just running back and forth on this thing trying to get that smoothness. And it dries, and I get this. All these little waves and stuff like that. Yet that's what makes the painting interesting. Had it been this perfect gradation, in this particular context, because I think it works in other ones, this painting I don't think would have the kind of activity and life it has. In fact, if I recall, Anne told me one time that she was told by the former director, you better straighten that canvas out because it's all wrinkled. And so there you are. There's an experience in and of itself. So the process is that moving around with your body and running back and forth, that's a part of what this whole creative process is about. And that's one of the exciting parts. And I mean, I used to really run. I mean, I would just go, because I didn't want those wrinkles in there. So I would just go back and forth, and this is what I would get. And until I was turned on to oils by my fiancée, who was an outstanding oil painter herself, an artist, I had the opportunity then to learn a little bit about how to actually make these gradations. You're never learning. You're learning where I wouldn't get them in the proper context, in the right context. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, yeah, most of it, but part of it is they're 8 feet tall. Do you lay them flat on a table? Do you put them, are they up against the wall, and are you on a ladder?
You're right, I didn't answer your question. They're up vertical. They're straight vertical. And that's how I'm running back and forth, yeah. One of the things, and I had to mention this to the docents, is the painting has to lean forward, because if I had the experience where if it's just straight, when I start to do this, it starts to drip. And I get these drips and stains, and I can't get the stains out. So I would tilt it forward so the water would just come straight to the floor. And then I could run back and forth and get it. But yes, to answer your question, it was vertical.
Do we have another question? Go
Yeah, I'm wondering, Dan, do you ever get to a point in work where you're unhappy with it? And if so, what do you do?
The question is whether you get to a point with the work if you're unhappy with it, and what do you do?
Yeah, there's a lot of times when I get to a point. I don't know if unhappy is the word, would be the proper word. For me, it would be just confused. I get confused, and what I'm thinking I should be seeing, or something that makes something that says keep going, don't stop. Sometimes I'll reach that point where it's saying this is a mess. It's saying working right. And it's not an unhappy moment so much as how do I resolve this thing that isn't working right? And I've had moments where I just rip the canvas off and throw it away, and just restretch it and do another painting. I had an experience back in Spain where I was working on a canvas, and it was almost finished and almost so beautiful, but the one section of it just didn't dry right, it just didn't look right, and it just ruined the whole painting. But the resolution was you go in there and you kind of cut that thing out and you re-stretch it and you got a small painting. Which is exactly what I did, and I have that painting.
Or two small
You just
paintings.
have to know what section to cut out.
Candy, go ahead.
So it's been my experience that a very common reaction to minimal abstract work is for somebody to walk into a space and say, well, I can do that. And I think you echoed that a little bit when you mentioned, you know, having to write about Tony Smith and not understanding this is art, why is this art? So what would you say to someone who walked into the gallery and looked at your work and said that, I can do that?
I have no problem with that. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, I could say something presumptuous, like, well, they're naive, but then I'm assuming, oh, well, they should know something that I know that they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Why not? If you think you can do it, do it. I mean, I copied Barnett. I mean, Barnett
Yeah.
Newman's one of my heroes. I mean, I just did so many Barnett Newman paintings that, you know, that's how I began to learn some of the process. I can paint a straight line.
Any other questions? Yep, go ahead, in the back.
Yeah, behind the gentleman. Yeah.
Yep.
Sir?
Steve, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah, there are two back there.
There were two hands raised back here?
Yep. So both,
Okay.
one after another.
At the same time, that would be good.
Yeah, you can experience both at the same time.
What you do.
Sure.
You just said straight line. I was just curious. Do you use templates? How do you get these lines so straight? Do you use a template?
I get them straight. I had to learn how to get them straight, and I had to learn how to get them straight because I wanted to be a figurative painter. I wanted to be able to paint things that look real and whatnot, and I could draw them, but I could never paint them. But then I started reading Barnett Newman and realized I could do that. You know, I saw those straight lines. I started learning how to make straight lines by using tape. I used tape and I used gel medium to enclose small little areas so that the paint won't bleed through underneath the tape. And then I pull the tape off, and that's always such a wonderful moment, I have to tell you. You pull that tape off and you get that razor sharp edge, and that's nirvana. It's just beautiful. Any hard edge painter will tell you that, that's experienced that. When you can pull that off. And it's interesting, the tape too, and we were talking about this, Richard. When you buy a roll of tape, one side of it is usually a little fuzzy. So if I take some tape off, I have to make sure I get a razor blade and cut that one side that's fuzzy, so when I put it on there, it doesn't get that little fuzziness, unless I want the fuzziness.
Steve, you want to go ahead?
Dan, I was wondering if you could activate a painting without paradox or duality, dichotomy. Can you do that, or what would you do if you lost uncertainty?
Hey, that's a really good question because in a lot of respects, yeah. When I'm relying on a certain kind of structural component to make a painting, I'm actually asserting something, and I think certainty is a good word for it. I think the doubt that comes in for me is it might not work in that particular context that I'm putting something together, and would I change that? What would I do, or have I done anything where I've actually done that? Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the earlier works didn't have the Necker cube. Would I go back, Necker cube structure? Would I go back and do that again? This painting here, the Aletheia Scribes Reveal, the big wooden one the last one I did, that is not related to the Necker cube visually. It's related to it conceptually, of seeing two different things kind of happen, opening up the wood, seeing the illusion, seeing the real thing. So that's more of for lack of a better term, an intellectual way of kind of like coming to the problem of the Necker cube, but not doing with it visually. It's one of the things that interested me about the Necker cube when I first saw a Necker cube as a Necker cube, an illustration of one, was that you viscerally, or with your eyes, you have this experiment going on about how you're going to balance where something is at. But conceptually, like I'm saying, you can't experience with your eyes both things going on, but you can think it. You can think it. So a lot of times when I approach a work like that, it's still related to the Necker cube, but it's not the structural components of a Necker cube. It doesn't have that diagram to it. But that's a really good question because the point I like about the question especially is there is a certainty going on there that I'm not aware of. And thanks for that. That's a good idea.
How would you relate Steve's question to your Goya series?
Ah, the Goya series.
That's where I thought we should go, yeah.
The Goya series, when I was in Spain, spent a lot of time in Spain, Goya is one of my favorite artists. And I understood that there was a relation. I read about Goya, and that there was supposedly a possible relationship between him and the Duchess of Alba. And he spent time with her, drawing her, and so forth and so forth. And he did a beautiful rendition. Do we have a picture of the Duchess of Alba? Okay.
We don't.
She has long black hair, a red sash, and a beautiful white gown. And I saw not that particular painting, but another one related to that painting, and the lusciousness of it and the beauty of it. And so it's like, on the one hand, for myself, I'm thinking, well, how can I do this? How can I reiterate? How can I make, in an abstract way, do the Duchess of Alba? Because I like the idea about this thing going on that maybe wasn't going on, that certainty and that doubt kind of thing. And it was really a wonderful experience for me. Number one, working in Spain, I learned a lot about a certain kind of earthiness I didn't have in my work, a certain kind of willingness to move in ways I didn't move with the brush before. And so, of course, I couldn't let go of the lines in certain things that began to represent things for me. But I did go out and I bought this big Indian a brush, like they do this, Asians use them in these big watercolors. And I never worked with one before. And so I wet a certain part of the canvas. I wet this part of the canvas and the two outsides, and I took this brush and I just put it in this black stuff. And I started moving with it, and these beautiful things started looking like hair. And, oh, this is really, really kind of nice. And so I decided to let it stay, being the romantic that I am. That's her. You know, that's who she is. And so there's a certain kind of narrative going on in my own head as I'm working with that. And the contradiction, getting back to the idea of a contradiction, of being able to work with two things at one time. It was the idea of whether or not she had a relationship with him or whether they did or not. And likely they didn't, according to some scholars. But that was the idea behind it. I wanted to do that painting. That painting I wanted to do on dealing with that issue. I thought it was an interesting issue. It was kind of like a simultaneous.
Yeah, and I mean, it also raises for you the matter of truth. Like, what is the truth of the relationship? What's the historical fact, and is something hidden in that painting, for
Well,
example?
let's say that it was never consummated. It wasn't. I mean, it's something that there isn't any consummation going on, but there is in the painting. There is in the painting, at least for me, and that's why it exists. And it's one of my favorite paintings. I like it very much. It's called La Duquesa de la Luz de Gaifa. Gaifa is the play. It's the Lady of Light, filled with light. In Gaifa, Gaifa is the place where I work occasionally in Spain, and it's beautiful light out the window and that relative to her gown, and all these kind of stuff, all these kind of romantic things we do as artists. We all hang with this stuff.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. This went really fast, but thank you both very much, and thank you all for coming. Please join us in the lobby. We'll have, there's a table for some book signing, and, Dan and Richard will be available for questions out there too. Thank you.